righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. The wolf also shall...
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. And we are continuing the book of Isaiah. In chapter 11, we had talked yesterday. We had explored this first few verses of this chapter. Actually, not the first few, it was the 5 through 10. 5 through 9. I'm picking up around 10. Sorry. And then the last thing, one second here. Alright, sorry. Alright, so we had left off in verse 10. We left off a repeat of the similar sentiment that we had heard earlier in the book of Isaiah about, you will not say to your neighbor, is that way? For all shall know me? Is that a different one? Different place, I think. But, what was it exactly? The worst way to look things up on a tiny little scrolling text. Sorry. Oh. Verse 2, 5, we will teach, this is where it says, and we'll go forth and he will teach us his ways, come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, to the... Yeah, I think I just alluded to this, Pat, but it's similar sentiment. We talked about chapter 2 in relationship to chapter 10, or 11, sorry. Sorry. 1 second. All right. And then, come on, text. All right. So, it's going to be a time of unprecedented peace. That's the definite, depending on how literally you take the symbology, because it can be an overall indication of just general peace and all that. But then, by the same measure, the prophecy becomes somewhat disappointing because it becomes like a hyperbole. So, we talked about the whole animal thing, and we don't need to go back into that. So, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. 1 second. I'm not writing notes today. All right, the first verse of this chapter, it said there shall come forth a rod, the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And that's understood to be the Messiah, the seed of David. And identifying this passage as a messianic passage is not hard, because the reason people thought that the Messiah would be the son of David is because of things like this. So this prophecy is well known to be messianic, And it's one of the interesting things, like I have always said, I've said for many years, I think I've thought it for a while, and I've wanted to ask even a Jew just what they think, if they're familiar, someone who's familiar with the New Testament and not afraid to talk about it. But if there was ever a Jew who stood out in history as being the one to whom the Gentiles seek, come on. He shall stand for an ensign of the people. An ensign is like a flag, some sort of marker. Let's see what word they have here in the still on that. On the good old Bible Hub. Bible Hub. Brother Jesse, stand for an ensign. An ensign is a standard ensign signal or sign. Yeah, a sign. And a sign that shall be spoken against. Jesus was a sign. As it was written. As it came to pass, as I just quoted it there from, I believe that's which one, it's either Matthew or Luke when Jesus meets I think it's Luke, the sign that shall be spoken against. Let me see. I just want to find out where that verse is and make sure my mind isn't making up verses on me. Sign spoken against. It is actually, Luke 2:34. And Simeon, that was Simeon, yeah. Simeon blessed him, saying to Mary, his mother, behold, this child is set for the fall and rising again of many in Israel, and for a sign which shall be spoken against. Luke 2:34. Simon and Anna. And also Anna, she's one of those people in the Bible you can use in the New Testament as a reference to confirm that people of other tribes are present in the time of Jesus as part of the Jews' political union. And so there's no descendant of David, claimed or otherwise, who's ever really stood out like this, as especially one whom the Gentiles seek. And certainly, it's hearkening back to the time of David and Solomon, when Solomon, remember, the Queen of Sheba came to see all his glory. The Gentiles sought him, and that's the kind of thing that it maybe have in mind. Maybe not the way we look at it. Maybe that's not what Isaiah had in mind. But prophetically, when you think about Christ, wow, it's more true of Christ than anybody. No one has had, no king in Jewish history has ever had more Gentiles coming to him and bowing and indicating loyalty and obedience. Name another Jew in history that has anything like Jesus' popularity, and they could ever hope to fulfill the Messiah. I was just wondering, I know you didn't accept Jesus when he came, but, the prophecy said the Messiah, from the going forth of the commandment to the restoring of Jerusalem shall be, 62 weeks. And from this and that to the Messiah shall be 2 weeks, or 7 weeks. Point is, if you go through and calculate all those weeks, whatever you choose for there's some argument about when the going forth to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was exactly given. There's some dispute about which event and which one counts and which one doesn't. Even so, no matter what date you choose, he was appearing in the first century, according to the prophecies. The Messiah had to appear when Jesus appeared. If you were going to have a different Messiah than Jesus, he would either have to appear before or after him. Is there anyone more ensigmatic than Jesus? As far as an ensign, a signal, a marker. We divide the entirety of time by his birth. So if the Jews ever had a candidate for this prophecy, they're never going to get a better one than Jesus. Honestly, no one will ever come along. Who are they kidding? Who are they kidding? They had a Messiah and they didn't like him. Actually, a lot of Jews did like him, but the ones who did. The problem is, if you became a Christian, you kind of had a tendency to lose your Jewish identity. You don't have to lose your Jewish identity, but when you're ostracized from all the Jews, like in the first century often happened, if you became a Christian, then, you tended to lose your Jewish, cultural attachments, because if your family won't speak to you anymore because you become a Christian, it can be, difficult. But to this day, of course, there are millions of Jewish Christians. It's just, the fact that there are so many non-Christian Jews is always the part that gets the most attention. Because of the stumbling block that has happened, because of the blindness that has happened to them, and as it's written of in the book of Romans, that the blindness has happened to Israel. And this is the Lord's doing, so it's his work. His rest shall be glorious. It's interesting because it is one of the most, touted features of the New Testament is the peace. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." A glorious rest. Yeah, remember that this is, they mean the rest of, what does it mean, the rest? Well, when he brings peace and establishes his kingdom and all this, there will be a rest. And it will be a glorious rest. A glorious quiet, a glorious peace. Like when he completes all his works, when Jesus returns, he executes judgment and justice in the earth, and he brings about his kingdom, and it's all set up, and then the kingdom just exists for the time it's going to exist. And in that time, there will be rest. There'll be rest and refreshing and work. But it rests to a great degree from all the labors and toils of this time, that's for sure. But the giving of rest is something that is very important. I mean, from the beginning of the Bible, the seventh day God rested from all the labor which he had labored, and he blessed the seventh day. And so there's something about rest that's important. It's important that human beings rest. It's encoded into the most basic and primal portions of our religion, of our religious thinking. You think about it. It's in the whole resting thing comes about in Genesis, that God's like, hey, give man once a week a rest, will you? Take a rest. I'm resting. It's good. And when he brings out the law, he puts it into the commandments. Oddly, then takes it out in the New Testament, which some would disagree with, but I don't. It's gone. Jesus had lots of times where he could clarify and make the Sabbath and a big deal, and so could have Paul. He had lots of opportunities, but every time the opportunity came to talk about the Sabbath, all they were talking about how is don't let anybody judge you about the Sabbath and all that other stuff that doesn't matter anymore. Because the idea of rest and Sabbath still applies. The commandment still applies, but it applies differently in Christianity. Just the way his disciples could walk through picking corn, which was definitely a violation of the Sabbath. There's no way you can argue. I mean, you can argue it, but I don't see any good argument for saying that's not a violation of the Sabbath. As far as that it isn't an explicit violation of the written law and of the spirit in which the law was written. Especially when you compare with the way the law was enforced in the Old Testament. And so I won't hear really any more about that as far as I'm concerned. That's done. No man can judge you in the way you observe your Sabbath. It's between you and God. It's important between, don't just be flip about it, but the rest, Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God commanded us to do Sabbath because he wanted us to get the most out of our lives. And also because the Jews were a particular people and they had to live the way God wanted them to. Just for that purpose, just to stick out, just to be different. Just like that's why he would command them to put tassels on their garment. There can be no other reason. If you receive a commandment to tassel, it's to literally put fringes on your garments, like little tassels. There's no practical reason. You can't come up with some pragmatic reason. I always hear people like, oh, well, the Bible used to say you shouldn't eat pork because it's got trichinosis and it's unhealthy and et cetera, et cetera. And then that's why it was forbidden and why you still shouldn't eat it and all that. Because there's some sort of scientific reason. They somehow have trouble accepting that God would just make arbitrary rules that have no moral component other than obedience to them is the morally right thing to do in the sight of God. I mean, there's no moral reason why you have to wear fringes on your garments or phylacteries on your forehead for that matter. But since God has commanded, it becomes an imperative. It becomes like you must do this. And if you don't, it is immoral. In your religion, you've failed to fulfilled the commandments of God. So the rest, but it's free. The rest is made for man, not man for the rest. The rest is so that man can serve God, not so man can serve some other purpose. I mean, the purpose of the rest is to give us rest and refreshing so that we may serve God. It goes back to the idea of the escape from Egypt. I mean, it goes back to Genesis, of course, but also the escape from Egypt. Let my people go that they may worship me in the wilderness. The idea was to let them free from their bondage and that they may go into the wilderness and meet with God. And so, in so doing, they had a rest from their labor and their bondage, and easing of their heavy toil. And of course, rest, in everything, we need to take time off. No one can work constantly. No one can be awake constantly. We all have to sleep. We all have to take time off. That's one of the things I learned with the Bible study. I was missing a ton because I was burning out. I was just, 2 years without a break, it's a lot. For me, apparently. Somebody probably could go 5 years without a break. Better men than me, I know that. But, 2 years without a break was a bit much for me. I needed a break. After a while, I need to take like a week off. It's a good idea. It'll keep me fresh. Keep the quality up too. That's the thing. It's like take your darn rest. Like the Lord is saying, get your rest. Be productive. Be useful. We need rest. From all this crap, we need rest too. I mean, I'm sick of the world. I'm sick of the toil. I'm sick of the, and I don't mean the work. I mean just the toil, the drudgery of life. I like to work. I like to work on important things. I don't like to work on repetitive, meaningless tasks. I don't like to work on stuff that is not moving me forward, but is just spinning my wheels. You know what I mean? And it should come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. What he's saying is like, hey, I'm going to recover the remnant of my people from Assyria. Well, from the Syrian captivity, from the Syrian invasion, from Egypt, because there are Egyptian problems over time, too. From Pathros. I'm not sure Pathros where exactly. Well, Pathros, I believe, is. Well, I was going to say, I thought it was close to where Elam is, because Elam would be like modern Iran. Because there was the Medes and the Persians. Well, it would be in modern Iran, the eastern part of Iran, I believe. Elam. Because the Medes and the Persians were there at the western side near the Tigris-Euphrates, border with Babylon, which is modern Iraq, or partially modern Iraq. Modern Iraq contains both Assyria and Babylon. The Persians, but would be Iran, and so also the Elamites were also another part of the Persian Empire. Shinar, I've had people suspect that that's China. But, is that the one that, Shinar? I think that one was, let's see, let me actually look in my Bible if that was the place. Notice my fan started acting up again? That's because my nephew came over and asked me, did I fix my fan? Or how did I fix my fan? I said I didn't. It just stopped making noise. It's funny that it does. I think when it made that much noise, it would never stop. So, we're chapter 11. And we want to look up the Shinar thing. Is this the place in the Bible that I recall where my teachers told me, this is possibly a reference to China, and does that actually hold water? I don't know. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. Not in my mind. Because it's like all the Bible, they knew that China existed. That's not earth-shattering. In the a lot of the Bible comes from the middle, well, I can't remember if it's the middle, late, or early Bronze Age, honestly, as far as that I want to refer to. But before Abraham, like right about the time of the story of Abraham was as this Bronze Age civilization was collapsing. And so a lot of the things written in Genesis come from the time of that. They mean the mentality, the thought process, the legal considerations. It's all built around that civilizations. That's why there's similarity to Kodar Hammurabi. I mean built on, but it's like it arises from the same thing. The people who are being inspired by God are living in that time. And they had a worldwide reach, meaning civilizations were in touch with each other to a great extent. There were, meaning maybe China wasn't in touch with Israel like directly, but Israel had contact with Babylon and Assyria, and Babylon and Assyria had contact with Elam, and Elam had contact with India, and India had contact with China. That kind of thing was very much. There were a lot of great civilizations that did have contact with each other at that time. So it's not surprising. I'm going to move the mic a little closer so I get more of me and less of the buzzing. Now, having said all that, now I'll find out if I totally wasted my time coming here. Actually, it's, verse 11? 11. Oh, don't worry about that. From Shinar. Nope, doesn't say nothing about that. Oh, let's see here. So I think I'm off my rocker. Shinar. Do I have any note about this? Not even a little. Let's just look at what they say here. They'll probably say like possibly something. I forgot to switch back this whole time I've been on this. Shinar. Another name from Babylon. Oh, Shinar. Wow, I feel stupid. I forgot what that one. There is a reference in the Bible that is supposed to be Shinar. I thought that was in Ezekiel, which is why I thought it was strange here. Shinar. It just sounded similar. So I screwed that up. Oh, well. The stuff I said about the Bronze Age, though, is not inaccurate. Well, it's not wrong. It's maybe a little inaccurate. Well, Pathros, I guess, is Upper Egypt, which is like kind of towards Cush, actually. Does that make sense? Because it goes Egypt, Pathros, then Cush, Elam, Shinar. Hamath is in the north. The islands of the sea. I don't know. There's no special notes here. I don't like to get too caught up on the place names. The point is, let's just go back. All right, so it's enough of that. Let's read verse 12 to go with this. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Now, for me, it's hard to tell exactly which one he's talking about, because God's people have been in captivity on multiple occasions. Of course, starting in Egypt, right? In Egypt, they were in captivity. They became slaves, and they had to be freed by Moses. When the Lord sent Moses and Aaron to deliver them through all the miracles of Egypt. Well, and then also they became, like I said, they were oppressed many times throughout their history in Judges. Meaning after they left Egypt, they came and wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then they came into the land which God had promised them and took it. But during as they took it, because the people kind of, as soon as they got to the land, they sort of forgot everything that happened in the wilderness, and they become kind of native. I mean, they start just erecting altars everywhere. There's like a lot of, because there, it says there was no king in the land, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's the thing it says in Judges over and over again. No king, and people just kind of did what they wanted. It's sort of lawless. It's sort of like the Wild West of Israel, really. The book of Judges. And how's that feel? And so the book of Judges, there were oppressions, but never really captivities. They were oppressed, and they definitely had some of their people carried into captivity, but no wholesale captivity on a national level, like there would be when Assyria came. And also, and now when it says, were they captivated by Pathros in Egypt? It's like, well, because of they were dispersed in many ways because of the Assyrian invasion and also the Babylonian invasion. Some people fled to Egypt for safety, but also as part of their captivity during the Persian Empire, they also got spread throughout the Persian Empire. And so there was a major settlement of Jews in Alexandria, Egypt, and also Hierapolis, the city of the sun, I forget what it's called. But they had a lot of presence throughout the captivity in different places. Obviously, now there's the Syrian captivity, then there's the Babylonian captivity. The Syrian captivity took the entire nation of the north captive, minus a remnant, because you never get all the people ever. And then they took the Judah, they took a lot of the people captive too, but the nation persisted and the people stayed. And also, I always thought that they would have probably politically combined, because the remnant of Israel would have been so small they couldn't have formed a nation anymore. And so whatever is left over gets absorbed into Judah is what I would expect. And then the Babylonians came and took the entire nation of Judah captive, except an extremely small remnant. And this captivity, from this, there was all kinds of prophecies about the restoration. And then they were brought back to land under the Medes and the Persians because of the friendly disposition of Cyrus, the king of the Persians. And after that, they were in the land for a while, but then they were oppressed by the Greeks, Alexander the Great. They were not taken into captivity, they were oppressed. Like Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed a pig on the altar. It was because, I should have said that I didn't mention when the Babylonians took the Israelites captive, the Jews, the nation Judah, they also destroyed the temple and burned it to the ground. And afterwards, the Medes and Persians helped them rebuild their temple. And so there was a temple. And then they returned to the land. They were oppressed by various Greek kings, eventually earning their independence, only to be conquered by the Romans. And then the Romans, eventually, because the Jews would not sit still, after the time of Jesus, the Jews rebelled famously in 70 AD and were defeated by Titus, who again subject them to captivity and diaspora, mostly diaspora. They just spread them out and wouldn't allow them to live in their nation anymore. And they didn't, the fact that they didn't enslave the entire population is pretty generous. I don't know why they were so generous. I mean, the Lord be generous to the Jews. God only knows. The Lord be generous with the Jews, because they've had their blessings, but they've also had their hard times. So what I'm saying is, those are the three captivities. Now, from each of them, there has been some kind of return. But from this one, not a final return. Not an absolute return like that they were truly all gathered together. Like even now, Israel exists as a nation, but there are many Jews still in what is called to this day the diaspora, the dispersal of the Jews. They were dispersed throughout the nations. That's why they're recovered from many nations, because they're not held as a captive group. They were taken captive and then scattered. That is what, and because of that, it is why God in the Old Testament said that they would be left few in number among the heathen where they were scattered, and that he would utterly forget them, the nation Israel. And meaning, not that he would nationally forget Israel, but that political union was destroyed, and most of the people who lived in it also died and perished in captivity. And they were never restored. But with the Babylonian captivity, they were restored to a great degree, those who wanted to come, and not all did. Because there have always been Jewish populations established from very ancient times in many cities in Persia. Obviously, at this time, Persia is not a particularly friendly place to be a Jew. Certainly, since, it's interesting, because the Jews had existed throughout the ancient Near East geographical location, Iraq and Iran and all that, they've existed there all throughout the time of the dispersion, living with Muslims and stuff, and were generally tolerated, or tolerated better than they are now for many centuries. It's only in the last few years, and it's only especially since the formation of Israel itself that they have been the objects of particular hostility, because having that nation, they had to carve it out from somewhere, and in so doing, they just made a lot of Arab enemies. Because even though I know, and maybe you don't know this, but the Jews didn't steal the land. But they obtained it in a way that is kind of, it's not likely to make friends with the locals. Because imagine, right, let's say I'm living here. I'm a Palestinian. This is how it happened. Now, I'm renting this land from some lord, of Jordan. Some rich landowner who also owns, he's some kind of, the king of Jordan or one of his sons or whatever. It's owned by some monarch or other powerful landowner in the kingdom, and I'm just a renter, or I'm just, my family has lived here for generations, but I don't technically own it. Well, the Jews came and they bought the land from the rightful owner, which is that rich guy, and then they came in and kicked off the people who were existing there so that they could live there. And they didn't always force them out of the country, because the reason that the Palestinians are not in the country is because in the War of '67, when the Arabs invaded Israel, they told the Palestinians to get out, and because in a couple of days they were going to overcome the Jews and they could move into all their houses, so they got out of the way. And then when the Arabs lost, they found themselves stuck outside of the country. And for obvious reasons, the Jews didn't want to let them back in, especially, I can fully understand why they wouldn't want to. But also I can fully understand the bitterness and anger and anguish of the Palestinians. I do. Because it's like like I said, the Jews, they bought the land legally and rightfully, but there were folks who were occupying the land who were not the owners, but who were tenants or whatever. And, just because something's technically right, means technically legal, doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it good. And so, while that's technically all right, and I don't know if there was another way for them to obtain the land, and I certainly am in favor of them having a land of their own, and that it should be in Israel. I'm in favor of it. I don't know if it's right, the right thing for them to do, whatever, but I don't see how after the Holocaust you can deny them some sort of safe place to live. It just seems like logical. Because there's no more hated people on the face of the earth except white people. I'm just kidding. I think every people is hated by somebody or another. So it's really kind of the hatred Olympics are not worth running, okay? So that's a lot of history there. But it's good to know that history. If you don't have some, it's good to hear it over again, so we know and refresh our minds. What exactly is the history of the Jews? And the thing, when Jesus returns, he's supposed to gather them one more time. And there's an interesting thing you may not know. That when the Jews were returning to Israel in the last century, not all the Jews were in favor of this. In fact, many Orthodox Jews opposed it on scriptural grounds. And their thought, because their tradition taught that Israel would the Jews would only return to Israel when Messiah returned, because there are so many passages that connect the return of the Jews to their land to the Messiah. He is the one who will restore them to their land, and that means several things. One, the current state of the Jews is not an entirely. They're not, like, all the Jews don't live in Israel, obviously. Millions live in America and all over the world. So they're still scattered. Though there is a large remnant that has been gathered back to their land. Even so, it is expected that the Messiah will bring even more Jews back to the land. There's two ways of looking at that. That either it refers to the current diaspora that is still not returned, or that what is currently going on is not to be considered as part of this restoration for some reason, like it somehow doesn't count. I don't really buy into that. Or there's another thought that they could be scattered again. You know, people have talked about the Jews building another temple, and that could be a sign of the end. I don't know. The Bible does talk about Satan standing in the temple of God, making a show to the world that he is God, showing everyone, I'm God. Here, look, watch me call down fire from heaven. So it says that will happen. So people expect there to be a temple built. Well, there isn't one yet. But the truth is, they could build a temple, and that temple could be burned down, and Messiah never come, and then they could get scattered again, and then Messiah gather. Meaning, this could be just another. We could just be waiting on a new diaspora. We don't know. The thing is, Israel is a very small nation in a very precarious situation. I mean, it's good that all the Jews don't live there, quite frankly. It's good that all, why would you say such a thing, Paul? It's good that the Jews don't all live there because of nuclear weapons. And it's a very small country. And their enemies are developing nuclear weapons and would like to wipe them off the map. But I can't imagine them using a nuclear weapon on the state of Israel because of the danger to Jerusalem. And part of the reason they want Israel, they don't want... The weird part is, the main part is the thought of, I want to take their country, so I'm going to nuke them into oblivion. And then I'll reclaim the radioactive wastelands as my own. I mean, why? Why not just, I'll just claim for you the moons of Saturn, and you can have all that land, if you want useless radioactive land. I don't know. It just seems a little bit strange to me. We want that land so badly, we're going to nuke it. So I don't know if that's a real thing. But certainly they could do, I don't know, other parts of Israel, they wouldn't. Here's the thing. A lot of these extremists have shown they have no respect for ancient landmarks, monuments, look, the Assyrians were pagans and they built pagan statues and pagan temples, and there's all this pagan Babylonian pagan this and that. The thing is, as a Christian, I don't want to see it destroyed because it's history. It's not something that's any more than Hollywood. Hollywood, I don't like Hollywood movies, many of them, right? Many of them I don't want, but it's not that, and I don't want to see them. I don't want them to be successful, but I don't want them destroyed. If there's a movie being made, I wouldn't want to hunt it down until every copy had been, obliterated. There are movies maybe for which that could be made an issue. But I'm saying, but that's not my impulse towards just things I disagree with. It's just that they should be gone. To obliterate them. That's just too much. This is the thing with, some people feel that way about people. Set up an ensign for the nations. Jesus is that ensign. He is the one who calls the people together. He gathers the people. There's a gatherer of the people, then there's the breaker of the flock. The breaker. I always like the idea there's a shepherd, but the Bible only rarely talks about the breaker, which is the opposite. The one who breaks up the flock. The one who doesn't gather, but who shatters. That's kind of what I do. Well, I feel like it's more the spirit I'm in. I'm not a gatherer of people. I'm a breaker of conformity. The envy of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah. Right. Yeah. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not envy Ephraim. There was obviously a long period of civil war between Israel and Judah because of the split in the kings. They had a succession. The list of kings, right? Rehoboam splits off, and then it goes Jeroboam, right? And there are dozens of kings. That's how long the period of division lasted for a significant part of their history, for centuries. Or for, almost 2 centuries, I should say. Well, if you think about it, 1000 BC is about when David reigned. And if you consider the captivities were in the range of the 500 plus. Like my Bible says, the Syrian captivity took place in 611 BC. Modern scholars date that a little more recent. But whatever. Same general. So, I mean, we're talking centuries since David. You know. I mean, David, like, we're talking, I mean, from David to the captivity is actually longer than from George Washington to now. Isn't that astonishing? And it was quite a long-lived kingdom, you know, Israel. I mean, we're talking centuries. And you consider that before David, there was years of the judges and Moses and all that. They shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west. They shall spoil them with the east together. They shall lay Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. So the envy of they had a long period of civil war in which there was like envy of Ephraim. Well, Ephraim was the leading tribe, and in fact, when Jacob blessed the 12 patriarchs, when the children of Joseph were brought before him, he crossed his hands because Joseph had placed the children so that Manasseh, the older, was on Jacob's right, and the younger was on his left. And he placed them in front of him so that he could put his hands out straight, and his right hand would be on the eldest and his left on the youngest. But Jacob crossed his hands in the final act of being just a total stinker. I don't know, I forgot to keep it going. You know, he was a complete stinker in this regard. You know, he was the heel catcher. He was the one who took the birthright from Esau. I mean, whether he used trickery or not is immaterial. You know what I mean? It's like, I would never go up to my brother and just say, like, hey, give me your birthright. What do you trade me for it? And just, he says soup, I say okay, and then I'm going to hold his feet to it over it. I'm just saying. They don't seem like particularly close brothers. I wouldn't do that. I'm not even close. I have two brothers. One's waiting for the resurrection. The other one is still waiting. They're both waiting for the resurrection, but one's passed away. And then, but I wasn't really close with him. But I wouldn't do that to him either. You know what I mean? It's like, even though we weren't that close, I couldn't imagine doing that to him. So, well, probably the thing is we weren't close, but there was no hostility. And that's the thing, is like when brothers are hostile to each other, though, you know, we were never competitive either. Competitive, hostile, you know, I think about it, like we weren't close, but we weren't exactly butting heads ever. Like ever. So, maybe that's why I'm thinking that. Like, maybe it's not my virtue is what I'm saying. I don't want to sound like I'm saying, I would never do such a thing. No, but what I mean is he's a bold fellow. I couldn't do such a thing. I don't have the boldness to be like, give me your birthright. How about that? Give me your right of the firstborn. And he took it. He knew his man. So, Ephraim is also the firstborn. In that sense. He isn't the firstborn. The firstborn of the whole family of patriarchs is actually Reuben. But Reuben was kind of not a disappointing, let's just say he was a disappointing son. And his own father noted in his, as he was dying in his sort of will, or his blessing for his sons, when he talked to Reuben, he even mentions the fact that he had slept with one of his wives, and one of his father's wives, not his own mother or anything like that, but, you know, still a significant transgression. And he was never regarded as if he was the firstborn. You know, and in fact, even when Joseph was thrown into captivity, it was, you know, the ones who were instrumental in making sure he didn't get killed was Judah, I believe. Or was it Simeon? I forgot which one. But anyways, some of the older brothers were a little less instrumental. Well, because some wanted to kill him. That's the thing. Some of the brothers wanted to kill him. And others would not allow it. But anyways, so Ephraim was blessed as the firstborn. They were the leading tribe, the biggest tribe. But the king came out of Judah. Originally, the first king of Israel was from Benjamin. Saul was a Benjamite. But David was of Judah. And it was always said, even from the time of Jacob's blessing, that out of Judah would come the scepter. And even though the right of the firstborn was for Ephraim, and he was the leading tribe, the biggest tribe, even so, Judah, Judah, he envied Judah, the kingship. That's why, when the Civil War came, where was the king? in the northern kingdom of Israel? Oh, in Samaria of Ephraim. Yes. Ephraim, the envy. They wanted a king of their own. And Judah vexing Ephraim. They grieve the legit king. We are the heirs of David. Who is this upstart? Never recognizing it. Always feeling, that lack of respect, and that fact that, and also wanting to reunite the kingdom under themselves, under their own line. The kings of Israel wanted to reunite the kingdom under themselves. That's why there was war between Israel and Judah. They both wanted at times to conquer the other. But they shall fly upon them. Now, upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west. They shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. The flying on the shoulders of the Philistines, that's kind of odd. Fly means to travel really quickly. It means figuratively, obviously. Just like they're not going to literally ride on the shoulders, but it's kind of a funny image. I see, Jews riding on the shoulders of the Edomites or the Philistines. The Philistines are running with their little Philistine outfits you usually see in all the cartoons, like David and Goliath cartoon. You see the Philistines with little pointy hats and spears, and they're running, and that's how I see it. But and there's a little Jew on the shoulders. It's funny. It's a funny image. That's why I enjoy it. But what it's saying is, the Gentiles are going to facilitate and help Israel return. They're going to be, the Gentiles are going to help. And the funny thing is, like in this second, in the Persian diaspora, as well as in the recent return to Israel, Gentiles were very helpful to the Jews. The Persians were very gracious to the Jews, because many Jews had become very prominent in the king's house. Like you look at the book of Daniel, but also just the fact of Nehemiah, Ezra. It's not just like the Jews bragging. The Jews genuinely had pull with the king of the Medes and the Persians. And I think a lot of the reason the Jews did have pulls was the book of Isaiah, because they had prophecies concerning the Persians, which would have been pleasing to the Persians. And so they would be very cooperative. They'd have good reason to look with generosity and kindness on the Jews, because they were valuable members of their kingdom, and they had also, the Jews had developed a very, like when the king of Babylon finally came to Israel, or to Judah to destroy it, he was extremely angry with the kings of Judah. So, there was a reason the temple got leveled and burned to the ground. There was a lot of anger there, and their captivity was pretty harsh. And it wasn't, the Persians didn't have that same history with them, so they weren't angry with them. And they looked at them differently. And they had pity on them. So the Gentiles, yes, were helpful in returning the Israelites to the land. Spoil them of the east together. I mean, when they come, and also that the Philistines also, I think, probably were taken captive by Babylon also, because there were a lot of captives being thrown around. The Israelites and the Philistines are right there next to the Israelites. So Assyria and it would not be unlikely, if you were captivated by the Babylonians, to find that there was a leftover Philistine from the Syrian captivity floating around somewhere. So, but the point is, they're all headed back, and they would spoil them of the east. They would, where they were coming out of captivity, they would take spoil with them. This happened in Egypt too. When they left Egypt, they left with a great deal of spoil. They were given gifts and stuff from the Egyptians. They laid them down with gold and silver and gems and all that. They come back from captivity not empty-handed. You go into captivity naked, you come back rich. That's what the guy is saying. And it's it's not what you would expect. But it is what has happened. I mean, isn't it the big slam against the Jews that they make so much money? They're too good with money. We don't like them with money. All the Jews and their money. They're always. And I think it's just, look at, you let your race be the outcast of every nation. You try to live among nations without banding together a bit, and without looking after each other and really working hard. All that negativity has made them work hard. And have to fight and scrimp and all that. It's toughened them up. And so, yeah, they're very successful. It's not surprising the Jews are successful. It's their work ethic and cultural impetus that causes that dynamic. So I've heard people say garbage like, oh, you'll never see a Jew doing a menial task. So I've seen Jews bag groceries. I've seen Jews be garbage men. I don't know who the hell they're talking about. Like Moeller and Curly, they were in show business, but their older brothers were plumbers and electricians. Jews. It's ridiculous. It's just because you see an overrepresentation at the upper echelons, well, they push hard. And also, as a group, they apparently have intelligence that is one standard deviation above us white folks. So, it's not by accident that they're so blessed. That's why I always say, I don't understand Christians who are against them, because it's like, for the sake of Jesus, they're enemies. True. But, for the sake of everything else, I would not want to make them a particular enemy or try to do harm to them, because it's like they are God's people in spite of the blindness. You know what I mean? You never know, some stingy Jew you're dealing with might be the next Paul the Apostle. You really want to be on the wrong side of that? I'd rather be the one who preached the gospel to him than the one who... I don't know. It drives me nuts because people complain about the Jews, and I'm like, what do you propose to do about it? What's your final solution about the Jewish problem? The Jewish question and all. I was like, what about this? There's no Jewish question. It's like saying, what about the white question? And we don't get into the racial question. The question? What question? What about the... people ask it like it's such a serious freaking question. It really pisses me. I guess I'm just not... I don't know. It's funny because I grew up reading anti-Semitic materials. But my dad was not an anti-Semite. He's like, there's some anti-Semitic garbage in this newspaper, but I like it for other reasons. Because it was actually the spotlight, because they reported all that conspiracy theories, which he was interested in. But there was anti-Semitic stuff in there. I read it. But I was sort of inoculated with the thought of, I read it with skepticism. But not with just, what did it? I didn't just accept it. It was interesting things. Like I said, I've often heard the story of the Jews coming into the Holy Land in the modern era, told from the Jewish side and from the Palestinian side. And from each side, the other side is totally innocent and totally right. And when I've researched it, and then what I saw is like, oh, I get it. I see why the Palestinians are offended. I see why the Jews feel justified. But that's not to say that it isn't just a mess. You know what I mean? Or it could have been done better. It could have been done better. But you wouldn't have gotten the results you wanted. Which a lot of people just wanted the Arabs out and the Jews in. You know what I mean? A lot of people, not all. You know what I mean? The problem is, like for example, let's say when you have the whites moving in with the Indians living in space, right? It doesn't take a lot of hostile people on either side committing violence against the other side to create an environment of mistrust and violence. You know what I mean? Like, it only takes you could have 100 settlers and just 2 or 3 people or families that are hostile and violent towards the other side, whether it be 2 or 3 families of whites or even Indians. It only takes a few Indian hunting parties killing whites or whites murdering Indians to start a major conflict. It doesn't take much. And the same thing with the Jews and the Palestinians. It just doesn't take much. It doesn't take a large... You can have a lot of people of goodwill in an area, but it doesn't take a lot of people of ill will to really screw it up. I was talking, you think about like that January 6th, like the people went to the Capitol and they did exactly what I thought was going to happen, which is they did something silly. But the funny part is the government took it seriously. They did something goofy. They went in, there's guys wearing Viking helmets, and they marched around the Capitol. No one had weapons of any kind. So someone had zip ties, and they made a big deal about it. Whatever, just some kooky guy with zip ties. Okay, whatever. If you want to fight me with zip ties, I'll fight you with a pistol, and we'll see who comes out on top, or a knife. I'll take the box cutter over the zip ties. All right. I don't understand. Whatever. I mean, it is sort of like, it's what were you thinking? But whatever. Point is, there's a lot of well, you look at stuff like that, and it's like, what can people really do when they're upset about things? Like, how violent do you want to get? How much trouble do you want? How badly do you want what you're protesting over? I don't know. I don't know if I have anything more to say about this. I don't want to go in that direction anymore. I want to see if I have anything more to say about the spoiling of the East. No. I mean, just saying they're going to come into this land not empty-handed. Hannah, Edom, Moab. Edom, Moab, and Ammon were all kindred peoples. They are all the children of Lot. Lot was the nephew of Abraham. The people of Ammon, Moab, settled west and south of Israel, in what would be like modern Jordan, I believe, on the west bank of Jordan, on the south there, I believe. And say in Edom, Moab. Well, Edom actually is not a kindred. Edom is Esau, Jacob's brothers, descendants, and Moab is one of the children of Lot, and Ammon being his brother. And both names sort of indicating a kind of incestuous thing. And I often wonder if that's actually what they call themselves. And I think from the Moabite stone, it's actually obvious they did call themselves Moab and Ammon. The Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river. The Nile or the Euphrates, and smite it in the seven streams and make men over direction. I wonder what the river there is. Really quickly. Just leave it. I don't think there's going to be because they'll just say, the translation won't help you, because it'll say the river. And I'm just curious what my Bible suggests the river is. The river. He says it's the Euphrates. And that makes sense. If it is because usually when it's the river, because remember they're coming from scattered in Babylon and the West, so they need to come over the Euphrates, and remember they're being gathered from Egypt also, so they got to come out of Egypt. They say, I'm going to destroy the tongue of the Egyptians, see, meaning that's going to be completely eliminated, or it's going to be dried up, and also the river Euphrates. Interestingly, of course, we know the sixth trumpet. Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of men. When the sixth vial, says, the sixth vial was poured out on the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty, Armageddon. So, that's also Now the waters drying of the Euphrates drying up, and it's interesting because they're kind of low these days because of the damming and all that. The waters of the river dry up, and then the Egyptians see, and they cross over. But the thing is, that it could be that. It in the vial, it's for the purpose of these armies crossing over. But after Jesus' victory, it could be for the purpose of the captives returning. You know what I mean? So, like I said, there could be another captivity. You can understand the end times could come. And the first thing that could happen would be potentially, like as a precursor, that would be strange. But, like I said, there still is a diaspora. I'm more of a fond of thinking that the diaspora has not been totally restored than of thinking that there's going to be another scattering, though that's possible. So, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river. He will use his mighty wind, his ruach, his spirit to smite it in the seven streams. I think it means the seven bodies of water that flow into it, I guess. The people will go over dry shod, meaning in shoes without taking their shoes off. And their feet will be dry. And then the last verse. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, like as it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt. Just like out of Egypt, there would be a remnant left from Assyria. They would return to Israel just as God's people came to the promised land from Egypt. And notice, it says there's going to be a highway. There's going to be a way. A highway is a very clear path. You know what I mean? Like, there are paths hidden in the forest, there are paths in the desert, there are paths and paths and paths, little paths. But a highway is a road that's been thrown up above so it doesn't walk. Because the reason of making a highway is to make it out of the mud and so that people can easily travel and facilitate the traveling of beasts and of carts and of such things. You want to have a road that is thrown up and built on rock. The Romans built a lot of rock. So the idea is that there needs to be some sort of way for the people to come. Instead of, cutting your way through an uncharted wilderness, but rather a road, a way, a path. Ultimately, the path is Christ. He is the ultimate path, the way back to redemption, the way back to God's promised land, the way back to Eden, back to the places where God has promised to bless us. It is through Christ that we can arrive there. He is the ensign of the people to whom the Gentiles ought to seek, so that we could be reunited with God, and so that God could be all in all, and so that the Jews themselves also could enter in, because, Jerusalem will be trodden down the Gentiles till the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. That's another thing to consider, is that though the Jews have been returned to Israel, they do not actually possess it, because they are greatly restricted in what they can do. Like the temple, they can't rebuild it because the Muslim shrine there, and it's going to be a problem for a long time. I mean, because it's like, I know the Jews have suggested moving it, which is never going to please the Arabs, But that is a step. It's definitely more reverent than destroying their mosque. It's kind of, I'm just saying, it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to blow it up? They have suggested it. There's some Jews who would like to. I don't know. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. The only way we really need is Christ. He is the one who makes the highway in the desert. He is the one who opens up the streams and makes the way clear that we can return to God. For all this literal stuff with the Israelites and the Jews, remember that we are the grafted in sons of God. We are grafted into the nation Israel through the power of Christ, and we are already in his rest. We have already inherited a promised land. We have only to receive it. But those days are yet coming, so we can have that to look forward to. All right, we'll continue in chapter 12 tomorrow. And until then, thanks for joining me, and we look forward to being back again tomorrow. Say your prayers.
Shall he judge the poor and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth? And he with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked, and righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his